Okay, let's start with the easy one.
Okay.
I'm curious, what kind of stories did you grow up with, or not even like grow up with, just like here, this could be grade school, high school, college.
Sure. It was pretty eclectic. Like my parents were avid readers, but their content was typically like airport trash. So it was like, and not to knock it because I still love these books, but like my dad read a lot of spy novels like Robert Ludlum, but then they would also swing and do like Doug Adams. So like I was hip to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy when I was like 6 and 7 years old. And I watched the original BBC like mini series of that when I was really young. So growing up the way that I did, which was in a very conservative evangelical Christian home, there was a lot of my my like library was very narrow. So it was these books are good, these books are bad. And so I was like, okay, so I would stick within this lane, but I fell into comic books when I was around. I mean, my first graphic novel I picked up when I was like 7, 8, and it was a Batman origin story. And I was like, oh, this kid that's like my age. What? How? Oh my God! Does anyone know his parents died? So I read a lot of graphic novels, and I read a lot of like I got into the Odyssey, and I got into Lord of the Rings, and I really got into like for some reason it was totally fine for me to read all of like C.S. Lewis and the Chronicles of Narnia. That was fine to my parents, but like if I started to wander too far off into fantasy land or whatever, they would rein me back in really quick. And I still am a pretty voracious reader, but I tend to read less fiction now, and I go more into. I'm really into stoicism and history, and so my tastes are more historical and philosophical these days than they are entertainment or fictional.
Interesting. I love the arc you
Uh,
had. Just a follow-up to that, is this shift just because you feel that you've gotten more mature, or also because you work in like entertainment? You're like, okay, I deal with a lot of like fictional stuff, so now I want to kind of disconnect.
Interesting. It's funny. I don't know if that's a conscious choice. I do feel like that applies almost more to games. Like I spend so much time within the game space and thinking about how games are made or in the process of making games. And I also have like, I love my family. I have a 5-year-old boy. So like if I'm playing games, it's going to be with him. And I convinced my wife that I should have an arcade at our house. And so I have a Golden Tee machine, like an original 2003 Golden Tee machine, and I have one of those Godcades that has everything on it. And so my favorite thing to do is like my son and I will go into we converted one of the bays of our garage into like a Garcade kind of thing. And it's a total dude space. Like a drum set is in there, and my son and I play drums together, and that's where like my PlayStation is, and it's just like a brick wall, and it's really cool. But I'll just let him choose a random arcade game, and his taste is really interesting because like his taste right now he's 5.5, and I if I just said 5 he would correct me and go it's 5.5. He's very precocious 5.5. But I if I just let him choose, like he'll choose Galaga or he'll choose like Centipede the other day or kind of those 1942 full screen shooters, and those we can play together, and it's so fun to watch such a simple design and a simple aesthetic appeal to him. And we laughed at with this one game that was just like souls born hard. Like it was just crushingly difficult. Like if I had to pop quarters into that thing just to continue to play, I counted it would have been like $30. It was insane. It was just a brutally unforgiving because it was Halloween. We were doing ghosts and goblins, and he was like, "This is hard." I'm like, "I've never beaten this game," but like that was my platform growing up was arcades. We didn't have a lot of money, so we barely had a TV, much less like a Nintendo or anything else when I was growing up. So all of my friends had that. So I was always beholden to whatever they had, their availability, and what they were playing. And typically I sat shotgun, and that's a position that I actually grew to love is like being the guy that was supporting the dude playing, or I would have like the Nintendo magazine out and like the power Nintendo Power magazine, and I was going through like seeing if we could find any hints. Like I was a great co-pilot. But then as I got older, I remember the first actual platform that I bought was a PS1. And I bought it because all of a sudden it was like super cheap. And I was like, I have enough money for this. And then like 2 weeks later, the PS2 came out. I'm like, son of a bitch. It was the first time that I ever got like out teched.
Oh,
And then I immediately had to buy the PS2 and I was gone. Like I was a PlayStation kid for life. And since then, I like to try to be as varied as I can. Like I love playing on Xbox. I really have broken into PC, but right now, if I'm playing games, I'm gonna be on my Switch or my Steam Deck because I travel so much, and it's the portability of that is really helpful. But to answer your question, as far as if I editorialized my catalog of what I was reading because of the entertainment industry, I really don't think that's what it is. I feel like as I get older, I think that if I focus too much on crafting narratives, then I can be influenced by the things that I'm no, I'll plagiarize whatever I'm like. If I'm watching a performance, I'm going to somehow, even subconsciously, I'm going to emulate that. And so, by the same thing, if I'm writing something, I'm going to emulate the writing style or even the story elements of something that I'm reading. But if I'm just reading about what has happened in life, then that can somehow inform kind of my experience. And then I can filter it through that lens. And I think it is a pass through. But it's just stuff that I'm drawn towards too, is something that's a little bit more, at least for right now, something that's more in line with like the philosophical or the historical.
yeah, yeah, no, I mean, it totally makes sense. So, that
Boring, I know, but
no, it's good. It's perfect though, and I love that you're more now into the historical space. I mean, that's where I like live my life anyway. So
cool.
that segues us perfectly into the next question. And you can take your time with this question as well, but like what Greek or Roman, whatever, just like ancient myths or characters, stories, whatever, can you name off the top of your head as being like especially memorable to you? And why is it memorable to you?
Yeah, the Odyssey, absolutely. I read the Odyssey before I read the Iliad, and to me, the Iliad starts to kind of get a little fuzzy, but the Odyssey is very clear to me. I read that before I had to, and then I read it again, and then I read it for school, and then I would kind of follow it up. And that to me is just like it's such a relatable story, and it's such a story of perseverance, and it's a story of what is truly important to you. It's such a simple story about a man who's just trying to get home. And I think that's when I fell in love with, and Neil has put this best. He was like simple story, complex characters. And I think a lot of times, regardless of the medium, I think that people fall into the trap of creating complex characters and hoping that somehow out of that will be born a story. And I think that what I have found, the stories that I'm drawn to are the ones where it's like, it's a very simple story. One of my favorite books is City of Thieves. It was recommended to me by Neil Druckmann as one of the influences of The Last of Us. And if you look at that story on its face, the plot of it is very simple. Two kids trying to find a dozen eggs. And look at The Last of Us. Get the girl to the fireflies. Everything is a very simple task. We need a battery. That thing, that simplicity to me always gives the reader or the viewer or the player a handhold to anchor themselves so that they can swing wildly about the emotions and the complexity of the character and always feel like they're rooted in a real place.
Yeah, great answer. I love the Odyssey. It's one of my favorites. Although I will say that I probably am one of the people who actually prefer the Iliad.
No, it's I would say it's kind of a 50-50 thing. And to be really honest with you, I think that there's more, obviously we've heard more stories come out of the Iliad. There's most of what people say, it's Star Wars in a lot of ways. Like most of the lines that people quote, most of the scenes that people quote actually come from Empire, not Star Wars. But they'll just say Star Wars, kind of like a generic brand. Most of the things that we know about Greek culture and like Trojan horse and Troy and Helen and all of those things, all of those are born out of the Iliad. It wasn't the Odyssey. The Odyssey is kind of like a very narrow story. It's about one dude just trying to get home. That's it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, and then as a creator yourself now with sort of different varied experiences, having read the Odyssey and some of the other things, and having felt this sort of connection to the story, why do you think a lot of these ancient stories still get told today? Like, is there some inherent value? Are they just entertaining? Like,
Because the stories never change, the characters do, and the setting does. But it is always, it's the classic thing, it's boy meets girl. It's that story, the simplicity of love. And you can look, that's a perfect example, because now what we're seeing are different kind of stories where it's boy meets boy, girl meets girl, or boy meets someone who's still trying to figure that out for themselves. And but the currency of the conversation can change, but the stakes never do. And the value of that conversation never changes, where it's like, I think the reason why love stories are so prominent to our culture is because it is the easiest analog for purpose. And it's because it's on a genetic level. It's like we're driven to be, we are not solo creatures. We are pack animals, 100%. We're always trying to find who our people are. Where do we belong? Why are we here? So that story has been told countless times over and over, and it will continue to be told over and over again. And so I think that what we can do is, as writers and creators, we can have a tendency to kind of add on these different layers to that and make it, well, it's actually in the third age of Aemir, and what's actually happening is this is the epoch of Gorgamak, and all of these different creations and machinations of lore that we can add to it. But at the end of the day, it's always just, what's the quest? And sometimes that quest can be just, I mean, Lord of the Rings is the perfect example of that. What is it really about? Get the ring to the mountain. That's it. That's the plot of it. But it's about discovering who you are and who your friends are along the way. That is really the core of that story. As well as, on top of that, Tolkien doing a complete commentary on industrialization and war. There are those themes that are being applied to it as well. But for the most part, we have been wrestling with the human condition since we were walking upright and trying to figure out who we are, where we're at in time and space. And every story that we've ever told is born out of that.
I agree. And it's interesting from what you were saying, I was thinking back to one of my favorite modern stories. I love everything Miyazaki has ever done.
Sure.
And I mean, like Spirited Away, it's so simple, right? How does girl get her parents back? And yet the
So
film
simple.
manages to be like so complex to talk about like consumerism and environmental stuff. I mean, it's insane, like what he's done in such a simple, short runtime.
If you ever
Um,
go to like any, like, this is the restaurant that is lauded for whatever. Like if I go to an Italian restaurant, I'm looking for cacio e pepe. I'm looking for just like spaghetti bolognese. I'm looking for the most simple thing. If I go to a Mexican restaurant, it's like I want to see like the most simple, basic thing ever. Because if you can do something that's simple with perfection and with excellence, that to me is far better than, we've created this dish with all of these different flavors and all these different complexities that are happening inside of it. It's like, if you can make noodles, butter, cheese, pepper good, that then that's truly amazing. It's like, what can you do with the simplest of elements? I think about it in the same way with music. I always have a tendency to overcomplicate. And I think about interesting chords, and I was like, what's a really interesting way to do this song? What if I added horns or a gospel choir and strings and mandolin and all these different things? But the reality is, a song is two things, and that's lyrics and melody. And if those two things are good, then that's what's going to reach someone. And I was even, it's so funny to go scrolling through TikTok. I'm not even going to try to pretend like I was reading somewhere. It's like, no, I was scrolling through TikTok and I saw this cover, and it was like someone doing a really, it's what they do. They do these crazy mashups, but it was Staying Alive mashed up with Virtual Insanity with Jamiroquai. And if you listen to the lyrics of Staying Alive, they're really poignant. Dancing in the Dark, Bruce Springsteen, is like one of the songs where they're like, boo, that's your, I just called to say I love you. But if you listen to the song, or listen to the lyrics, I mean, it is like, it's incredible. And so to me, it's not always about the elements, it's the execution. And if you take Dancing in the Dark and strip it down to acoustic and vocal, that song will bring you to tears. I literally watched it today. It was like someone was listening to that and they were crying over Dancing in the Dark, like this cheesy song, but the lyrics and the melody are so powerful. So I think that's what I've always tried to be a part of. And especially as I get older, that's what I'm drawn more towards is like big is awesome, but what can you do with simple?
Yeah, it makes sense. I think simplicity is one of my favorite things, definitely. I got into a discussion just the other day with a friend about how there's a song actually that I've been into for years by the band Avenged Sevenfold. And I was like, yeah, it's a good song,
Okay.
whatever, I'll listen to it. And then my friend was like, let me send you something that will change your life. And I was like, okay, what? And it was just the instrumental version of like one of their most complex songs.
Yo.
And I listened to it and I just said, oh my God, I listened to this whole thing without lyrics, but the song is so good that now I listened to the whole thing and I could hear the lyrics in my head. I don't even need anything else.
They as
Um,
composers are doing some pretty complex things. I'm gonna make a coffee real quick, so you may hear me making noise.
oh no, you're good.
Okay, continue. This is a great conversation. I'm loving this. I hope you are as well.
Oh yeah, any chance to talk about history, mythology, nerd out, I'm into it. So I've only got one more sort of on the history side for you before we can get
Go.
into the game. But do you think that, and as you've said, as being a history lover, but do you think that the ancient and modern worlds still have a lot in common today? And like,
Oh
do
my
you think
gosh.
people should still be studying, like investing time in studying the ancient world?
Yes. For no other reason than to find it comforting, because every generation has felt, and I'm not even just talking modern history, I'm talking about into antiquity. Every generation has thought they are the last generation. Like the world is going to end. That is it. They will see the apocalypse. And the main reason why is because it is almost it's very uncomforting for us to not be able to fathom our own mortality. So if we're going to end, then everything has to end with us because it's really scary and it's very humbling to think this is going to go on without me. And it's way easier for me to go once I shut down, everything shuts down with me. So I will be, it's the same thing that I fly a tremendous amount. And there's always this part of me where I'm like, this plane's going to go down. And of course, the reason why I think that is that my ego says, I'm going to be the one. My vanity says, even though statistically speaking, there are thousands of flights that take off and land safely, completely uneventful. This one, because I'm on it, is going to be the one that goes down. And that's ego. And the same thing applies to it is the worst time. The world is going to hell in a handbasket right now. This is the worst time to be alive. Not true. Empirically not true. By every metric, by every statistic, this is the best time to be alive. There is less war, less disease, less crime. But all we see and all we feel and all we hear about is all of the bad. And the main reason why is because that's what we allow our influences to tell us, because that is what sells. They make a lot of money off of keeping us afraid. And I'm not like conspiracy theorist against the government. It's just the nature of things. It's a great way to motivate people to do stuff. But I think that if we look back at history and go, if I read about Marcus Aurelius in 160 AD, talking about and dealing with the same things that I am, man, that's comforting. When he talks about the politicians that he's dealing with and how everyone is a liar and how these people are so wrapped up in their own vanity, I'm like, I can see how these themes stretch across millennia. And that brings some comfort to me to know, okay, maybe it's not as bad as I think. And secondly, if they got through it, I can get through it. And also, this is going to go on without me. And I have a tattoo that's based on a Stoic philosophy. It says, Memento Mori, remember that you will die. And that people are like, oh, that's such a depressing thought. Like, it's a motivating thought. Hey, you want to write that book? You want to go on that vacation? You want to tell that person you love them? Memento Mori, remember you're going to die. Get on that. Or that person cut me off in traffic. Memento mori, remember, you're going to die. Is it really that big of a deal? Should I really hang on to that grudge? Maybe it's just a little bit better if I just ask for forgiveness instead.
I will say it is so interesting to me that you have a tattoo that says Memento Mori because Ozymandias is my favorite poem, and I have every guest read the poem, reflect on it. And the main thing we always talk about that I always mention is the main thing of Memento Mori. So I have every guest talking about that theme.
How cool is
So
that? Huh.
so I'm
Yay, I
like,
passed the vibe check.
I knew you were cool. Oh man, that's amazing. But yeah, no, I love to hear just from modern people all the time. Like, do you think that did I waste my time in school for 5 years studying nothing but ancient history? That's like an ego thing, but we're all here like, oh man, am I really gonna tell my parents, hey mom and dad, I'm just studying the ancient world? That makes me really marketable in the modern world.
Well, I mean, there's a difference between marketable and there's a difference between applicable and usable. You know what I mean?
Yes, for
Like
sure.
you have a perspective on things that a lot of people don't. So is that a transferable skill if you're going to go get a 9 to 5 job? No, not necessarily. But I do think that it adds to your worldview and allows you to offer something to commentary that's beyond just derivative bullshit, essentially.
No, it's true. It's true. So, okay, moving a little bit now from the history space that we've been in, which I love and I would love to get more into, but I got to move us along. So, one of the sort of glaring things I'd love to know is when you are watching or playing The Last of Us Part 2. I mean, I suppose you could say for Part 1 as well, but this is mostly about Part 2. What are the types of things that you are thinking of most when you are
Man,
playing the game?
it was so great because I had such a completely different experience from part two than I did from part one. Because part one, I'm intimately involved with every scene, right? Part two, I wasn't. And I had the opportunity to experience it as much as a player as was possible beyond the bounds of my awareness of the story. But there's so many things that were just a complete and total surprise to me. And Neil would, I asked him, like, keep me from, I don't want to know. As your friend, like, he pitched me the whole thing. He would not pitch like my approval, but just like, hey, let me walk you through beat by beat. And so early on, I got a complete walkthrough from the very, very beginning, which ended up changing as far as what the beginning was, all the way to Santa Barbara. And there's very little that changed. One of the things that was that we ended up adding the beginning scene with Joel and Tommy because it became very obvious that there were going to be a whole new generation of players that had never played part one. How do we best onboard them so they don't go, who's the old guy and the girl? And that's a very fundamental problem to the emotional core of the story and conveying what's at stake. And so instead of doing a previously on The Last of Us, Neil came up with this idea of how to narrativize this. And it was originally a scene that I was very much against. Man, I pushed back against it because I was like, Joel would take this secret to his grave. He would never tell anyone. If he can't tell Ellie, he's not going to tell anybody else. And Neil was like, exactly. It's eating him alive. And I'm glad that I listened to him because that scene ended up becoming one of my favorites. And one of the main reasons why is because Jeffrey Pierce, like, he is an actor and he is a scene partner. I had completely excluded him from the scene, and it was just not even Joel, it was just me in that scene going, I'm in opposition to this. And the second that I just sat down and just we started going through it, and I'm now in it with another person, and I'm watching what Jeff is doing with Tommy, it changed everything for me. And we just kept doing it over and over again. And every time we went deeper and layers got removed. And by the end of it, I mean, I'm bawling. And it's such a great scene. Such a great scene. But as I'm going through it and playing it, I'm surprised. And there were definitely moments where I was more surprised than others. Some of my favorite my two favorite scenes or two favorite moments in the game are the house afterwards, like going through Joel's house. I cried hard, obviously, at the scene that preceded that. And I was playing like 2 or 3 hours a night, and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, I'm just heavy from playing through that scene. And I'm like, I gotta go to bed, but I can't leave on this note. I'm just gonna play a little while longer. And I'm glad that I did because I had no idea that was coming. But then, like, I cried with the scene with Joel. I wept in the house. And I texted Neil and I was like, the house is the funeral and the wake. It is the mourning and the celebration because you get to go through, and I instantly missed him. And the way that the story plays out is so perfect because just when you're like, man, I really miss Joel, then you go back and there he is. You're like, I didn't realize how much I missed you. And I ended up doing the stupid thing of just like when you're standing there in the river, I just looked at him. I just missed that dopey smile. And there was so much about just his presence physically being in the game made me realize that he's present all the way throughout the game. So anybody comes up to me and is like, I just wish Joel had been in the game more. I'm like, he's all the way throughout. He's constantly there. They're constantly talking about him. He's constantly a source of motivation. You're constantly being reminded of why Ellie is on this vengeful quest. And to me, I don't know, it's no one has ever been able to pitch me a better story than what we already had. The second moment is the porch, which was never, or Neil could be clear on this, but I don't believe that was meant to be the last scene. It just editorially, I was like, this is it. This is gonna be the last moment. Because I think ending on the guitar against the window, and that's the perfect frame. That was always going to be the last. And then to have the porch scene be there with it brought so much context to that moment. So those are my two favorite scenes, but everything else was really a surprise. The WLF and everything was like a total surprise.
Interesting. I love that you were involved in the process of the game, but the fact that they were able to sort of keep and make sure that there were surprises, even for you, is really
Yeah.
impressive. That's really cool. And that segues us perfectly into you. I don't know where you're gonna go with this, so I'm just gonna ask, what does nostalgia mean to you? And do you think it's positive, negative, neutral, anywhere in between?
I think it's contextual. I think that it can be such a warm blanket and it can be such a source of comfort. It can remind me of my roots. It can remind me of from whence I've come. It can remind me of what's important. It can inspire me to try to emulate that. But it can also, I can be beholden to it in a very counterproductive way because am I trying to create something new or am I chasing that thing? And I think that we hear this all the time. It's Eckhart Tolle thing of being present, but it really is true. And if the sense of nostalgia is in the same way that we wake up and quickly try to remember the details of a fleeting dream, we can do the same thing with nostalgia. How did I really feel? And I was just listening to this book actually, and they're talking about the way that memories actually work. And memories are not snapshots that our brain has taken. Our mind is constructing them brand new. It's not like we have to go and access that and it roots around through the files of our brain. It actually constructs it brand new, and it's every time is a one-off. And our brain will not present to us an unfinished memory. So what it will do is fill in the gaps with its best guess. And in this room, I can't necessarily remember the colors of the pillows, but my brain will go, I think they were this color. And they'll present to me, and I will go, yeah, the colors were this, even though it's wrong. And I will reject the truth and accept my false memory because my memory presented to me so clearly and so vividly. And the more I think about that memory, the more I will reinforce the truth and the validity of that memory, which is where we get this whole Mandela effect, like Berenstain Bears. We think that it was Berenstain because we never see Goldstein, Rubenstein. We see Goldstein, Berenstain. That's the typical way that we see that. And that's what our brain wants to do, is just go, this is the standard. We're going to slug that in. And when we see something opposite, it feels weird because that's not the way that we remember it. And so we must think that something has happened. There must be some conspiracy. There must be some bigger thing. So I think that nostalgia can be a very useful tool, but it can also be a trap. And I think as creators, we have to be very careful. It's the whole South Park member berries thing. Sometimes the thing that we're remembering is not as good as we think it is. Our grandma's house was actually smaller than we remember. That fort that we built in the backyard was not as cool as we thought it was. And maybe the thing that we have now is actually better. Maybe the version of this thing that we have is actually better than that one.
Yeah, no, it definitely tracks. So sticking with the theme, like what would you say that you get nostalgic for, and what are some of the things that can trigger nostalgia for you?
In places and smells. I do travel a lot, and there's this one part of Paris that every time I go there, I think about the first time that I went there when I was 13 years old. And to me, it is unchanged. It is never wavered. It is always, and far before I was there at 13, it was this thing. It's in Montmartre, and it's this square where artists are and restaurants are and cafes. It's just this thing on top of the hill right behind Sacre Coeur, which is the basilica that sits on top of the hill overlooking Paris. And at 13, it was just an indelible memory that I had. And that trip is where I fell in love with traveling. It's where I fell in love with Europe. It's where I fell in love with, like, this is a goal that I have. And a lot of it has to do with, at night, that place feels like an amusement park. It's the market lights, it's the cobblestones, it's the sounds, it's the smells, because there's all this food that you're smelling. And it's the music that you're hearing both being played in the square and floating out from the restaurants. It's the smell of the cigarette smoke and the wine that's been spilled on the cobblestones. If it's just rained, how the streets smell. It's all of these things that are implanted as these nostalgic memories that I have. So being in a certain place can definitely trigger that for me. It's like, man, I remember the last time I was here. Every time I come back here, I'm very much the Cheers factor guy, where I want to go somewhere where everybody knows my name. And that's not like a fame thing. It's just, I like being able to welcome someone saying welcome back, or even better, can I get you the usual? Like that right there is, to me, I will go miles just to revisit a place. Like our grocery store, we, for the longest time, we went back to this grocery store just because I knew that I could go to Mike, our butcher, and he was like, hey, it's Tuesday. You ready for some grass-fed beef on Tuesdays because you're making steak tacos, right? I'm like, yeah. It's all right, we cut that up for you. Stuff like that to me is really important. Where I think it can be a trap is if I start thinking about making my new grocery store that, or trying to make this project that I'm working on that, and moving people around like they're chess pieces so that they function and behave like this, because I really enjoyed that. So what I try to do is, I think it was Alan Watts who said that the past is sacred because it's sealed. That means it can no longer hurt you, but that means that it can only be accessed through the looking glass. It can only be accessed by you observing it. And for me, to be able to appreciate and respect that there is now that barrier between me and the past, allows me to accept the people that are in my present and the elements that are in the present, and make best use and partnership with them.
Yeah, makes sense. And I mean, as the person who brought Joel to life, would you say that you and Joel share any sort of nostalgic memories or triggers, or did you allow yourself to sort of filter into the character, vice versa?
I think if I don't, I didn't do my job. To me, Joel is a person. And part of that reason is that I think there's a lot of people that have a process of creating a character from the ground up and just out of the ether being able to produce this fully functioning human. I can't do that. That sounds exhausting to me. And whenever I've tried to do that, invariably that's where I'm in conflict with the character that I have versus the character that they're trying to create. And so now we have to reconcile who's wrong. But the thing that I can do and the thing that we can agree on are facts and events. So you look at Joel, can we agree that Joel is 50? Yes. Can we agree that Joel grew up in Texas? Yes. Can we agree that Joel is a single parent? Yes. Can we agree that Joel experienced traumatic loss of his daughter? Yes. Can we agree that Joel survived this apocalypse? Yes. Can we agree that Joel is violent? Yes. So we compile all of these factors, all of these facts and events that we can agree on. And then I go, okay, what do I look like at 50? What do I look like from Texas? I don't know what that's like. My life experience, that's all that we are, is we are a product of our experience, our rearing, our age, and the things that we have, our life view, our lens has been cut on the lathe of our experience. So if I sit in there and go, what do I look like if in the event that I've lost my son, or in Joel's case, his daughter, what do I look like if I survive the apocalypse? And once I start putting myself through that, now, because we've already agreed on these events and these facts, I present to you me, this person. That's who this is. If I'm not matching up to that character, then I'm the wrong person in that role. It's not that we have an artistic disagreement or differences on the character. It's I should not have gone out for that role, or they should not have cast me. And what I'm trying to do now in my career is go, I'm not right for that because I don't know either. I don't. That's not a version of myself that I want to present. I feel like someone else can have some better experience that they can bring to that, or I have no idea what I would look like in that. And I don't know if I can bring that to you. And I respect what you're doing enough to get out of the way. It's not about, I don't feel like that's the right thing for me to do in my career right now. Who cares? Because if I'm doing it right, all that shit shouldn't matter. But as far as with Joel, a lot of it was like for Neil, the notion of his daughter dying was a very real thought experiment for him. For me, it was an actor's exercise because I had to hypothesize. He was dealing with that because his daughter had just been born. And so now I look back and go, oh, dude, I understood it cognitively and academically what Joel did. Like I understood why Joel made the decision. Now, 100%. The whole world can burn. I don't care. And when you hear a parent say, I would step in front of a bus for my kid, there's no bragging in that. It is just the sky is blue, grass is green. I would step in front of the bus for my kid. There's just something that evolutionarily a switch gets flipped inside of you that goes, you just do this now. One of the things that I love is that there's the spectrum of human hearing is from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, a little less for men, a little more for women. And there's this one frequency that, regardless, male or female, the human hearing has this sensitivity for this one frequency. And that frequency is the exact pitch of a baby cry. And it's crazy because like I can be dead asleep and all of a sudden I just hear my son. I'm like, I'm awake. And he's 5.5. So even to this day, the sonic fingerprint of his voice is imbued in my being so much so that I can always know where he is. And that's just an evolutionary thing so that we keep ourselves alive. Because until he's a fully functioning animal, he's still my cub and I'm responsible for him. So that to me was a part of Joel. Like he has that in him. He can't help himself. He has to do this. He's compelled not only to make perdition and retribution for his past mistakes, but at his core, he's just trying to be a better dad today than he was before. And sometimes we get small choices to do that, and sometimes we get big ones. And I think Joel is just chopping those up every day and trying to deal with that every day.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and then so this one is both for Joel and just other characters, but do you feel that the characters in The Last of Us 2 like think, I mean, we hear and there's always reference, right, to like the old stuff in the old world. But do you think that like these characters, do they spend more time thinking about their own past because that's what they've lived and that's what they have to think back on? Or do they actually spend a lot of time thinking about like the past more generally? Like, what
I
did
don't,
this look like?
I would say, I mean, again, this is probably a better question for Neil, but from my perspective, I think that you have two different types of people. You have now, we're so far in, we're now 30 years into this event where there are some people where what past? There is no past. In the very same that, in antiquity, you really didn't have a lot of people that were thinking about the future. We had a circular history. Your father was a shepherd, you will be a shepherd, your son will be a shepherd. And it's just that's how that cycle continued. So this notion of a linear timeline was kind of a misnomer. And I think that there are some people that were old enough to remember the time before, and we have to go back to that time, and that gives them purpose. And you have most of those people are starting to die off because anybody that was an adult in that time, I mean, is 50s at best, moving into 60s and 70s. And so those people are really becoming antiquated. So you do now have all these people that were raised in this reality. And so they're just trying to do this is the world that we know. And we are dealing with this world. So there's not necessarily this thing of like, we need to make things better. It's just we have to get through. So I think you have some people that are trying to get back, other people that are trying to move forward, and the most of those people inside that world are just trying to maintain. Because very similarly to a fish, one of the things I'm fascinated with fish is they will stay to the size of the environment. A fish will never outgrow an aquarium. You put them in a 10-gallon tank and they'll stay this small. But you put a goldfish in a pond, that thing will get the size of a dog. They're massive. And we're very much the same way. We will only scale to our environment. And there are some people that, man, you could talk about the institutionalization, and especially you want to think about racism and much of the isms that we have in society that are based on that are predicated upon that very notion that this is as high as you can go. And there's no ill will, no malice to it. It's just this is the way things are. And the only way this thing has ever moved up is because there have been people who do not accept that as a reality and go, we can be better. We can go further. We can outgrow this fish tank. But for the most part, people feel like this is my reality and I accept that.
Good answer. Good answer. Yeah, it's really interesting to think about. And kind of with this idea, what's scalable, what's not, how far are we as humans thinking? Do you think that humans can be nostalgic for a place or time that we've never experienced?
Absolutely. And I think that especially as we have that source material that is presented to us in fantasy and in fiction, there's this, if you really think about it, like we heard this all through the 2016 election. Where did my pencil go? We had this notion of make America great again. And this has nothing to do with, I'm just looking at it as a pure marketing thing, okay? Political affiliation aside. what I loved was people that went, when was it great? Show me when it was great. And regardless of the era, some people said, well, the 50s. You're like, okay, in the 50s, it was, you had a better home unit, you had, life was simpler then, like you also had segregation, you also, depending upon which part of the 50s you're talking about, we were at war. So I mean, what was great about that then? And there is just, I feel, because the future is unknown, most people will go, I don't know what's that way, but I do know what's that way. And that way, at least I knew the danger. At least I knew where the darkness was. So that way was better. And that way, but where I'm at now is terrible. And if we continue on this, it's only going to get worse because entropy. But this way, if we go back to the way that it was, then at least I get to go back to the demons that I knew. And the monsters that lived under my bed, I had their names. And the ones that lived in my closet, I could shut the door. And that is where we look at nostalgia and go, I wish that we could go back, even though the time that you're remembering never happened. The time that we lived, that we fantasize about and that we make this ideal and we venerate, never happened. It wasn't that great. The way that we look at pictures and the way that we look at film, you realize the only reason why it looks vintage is because of the lens by which it was being viewed. But that looks the same today. It's just the camera that we were using, the lens that we were using looked different. The world wasn't black and white in the 40s. It was color. It's just we don't see that because of the lens that we were presented with. But if you were to shoot it now, that's what I love, like the thing that Peter Jackson did with the 1918 or whatever, it was the World War I thing. It really puts the humanitarian aspect of that war on full display because you're like, man, it looks like it could be shot today. And it's no longer just people in antiquity and reaching back over 100 years, but those are people that they could be me. And I think that the more that we can do that, again, looking back to the past and realizing that over and over we've been telling the same story, that makes this time a little bit more comforting and realizes it's not about moving back, it's about moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. And playing around with timelines a little bit,
Sure.
it sounds fun. One of the things that I realized when I was going through the game was, all right, so it's set in the future. It's set in 2038, which actually is the same year that Detroit Become Human, one of my other favorite games, is
Yeah.
set. And you look at the difference in the world and you're like, what, like, whoa, Detroit has all these like AI things taken over. And then you have the world of The Last of Us Part 2, and you're like, what is going on there?
Two
So,
different
like,
forms of apocalypse.
right? So you're like, what is happening? So, why do you think it's important to set The Last of Us Part 2 so, like, in the future? Like, okay. And do you think it's important to the narrative, important to the lessons the game is trying to teach us? Like, yeah,
I
why
mean,
do we put it then?
I think that it would definitely be a question again for Neil, but from my perspective, what was important was the premise that this was really based upon is like what happens when if you remove humanity from the earth, how quickly nature will reclaim itself. And so in order to put that on display, time becomes a very critical character. We have to show what happens when time is allowed, time provides the space for nature to come in and replace humanity and reclaim itself. So if we were to say, and this is what the HBO show did, is they chose to go back and kind of retcon some alternative history. And I think that you can do that in a show, but with the game, it was anybody coming in going, that's not what it was like in 98. We instead were like, okay, so this is what it looks like if, this September, if this went down, then 20 years later, what would this world look like? Because again, what we needed to show is from today, it takes 20 years for the world to look like this. And what do we look like 20 years into this thing? So the notion of 2038 and everything is really kind of it's just a number, because what's most important is, what does the world look like with this set of time? You could have done it in the 80s, but it just would have been like a different game.
That's true. Yeah. And yes, I do realize that some of these questions are harder to answer if you didn't write the game, but I think it's still a very
No,
valuable
it's all about
perspective.
my perspective.
I have three last questions, and hopefully you can answer them in a succinct way. Just in terms of gaming, would you say you prefer choice-based or linear games?
I think my ultimate game is yes to both. What I want is a linear experience that offers me choices. I think that branching narrative, and we just shipped a game that was rooted in branching narrative. And I think that it is a great mechanic. But what I would love to see happen is that goes under the hood and you never know the alternates that you have. There's choices that you make, and you're never aware of where those other paths would have led. So I think that design allows us to have agency, and I always want to feel like I have agency in the game, that what the character is doing is in line with what I am doing, and that ultimately the world responds to those choices. When I have choice but the world doesn't move, those to me feel like, well, there's not really a choice if there's no stakes. And I always ask this when I'm like working on a game, is like, what's the fail state here? If I don't do this, then what in this scene? They're like, oof, that's a good question. We haven't thought about that. I was like, you got to, otherwise, what are the stakes? If we're doing this big scene where at the end of this thing, player has a choice to either go kill them or let them live. It's like, what happens if we don't do that? Well, we just respawn you. It's like, well, that's not really a choice. So I think that the illusion of choice, I would much rather have a game that didn't give me those choice if there's no consequence or there's no stakes, than offer me all of these choices that don't matter.
Gotcha. One of the biggest criticisms of the game was sort of what people felt like was the lack of player agency. And so I'm curious how you feel about the balance that was struck in the game.
I feel like that's, especially compared to part one, you had way more. Like, you got to choose. I mean, just right off the top of my head, I think about, there's that one fight where you can completely go around the shamblers if you don't want to fight them when you're in the parking garage, or you can be like, all right, let's fucking do this and gear up and test your fate. I was like, I am hiding and I don't care if it takes me forever to go around. The brutality by which you fight, there's only one dog that you really have to harm. Other than that, you don't have to do that ever. I feel like there's so many opportunities for people to reveal who they really are. And in part one, you kind of got one of those. It was, do you shoot the nurses? You're going to shoot the doctor, but do you shoot the nurses? And most people do, but there's a lot of people that didn't. And you can completely walk away from that scene not having killed those nurses. But we took that and we expounded all those opportunities throughout part two, and the world responds to you. The more vicious you get, the more vicious you play, the NPCs start reacting to that. Their deaths get more gruesome. So I don't understand the criticism of not having the player agency. I think most people didn't know how to reconcile the fact that no matter what they did, Joel had to die. And they didn't like that because they don't have a better version of it. And I think, again, memento mori, most people are very uncomfortable with death. They're very uncomfortable with people that they care about dying. And I think everybody who played it that wrestled with that, I'm glad that they did. I'm glad that they played the game, because I think the more that we can let people know it's okay, we have to get good at this, because we're going to deal with it a lot. And ultimately, we're going to deal with it one more time. And everybody that I revere, like Marcus Aurelius put it best. He was like, depart this life satisfied. And that is, there was an inscription at the Temple of Delphi that had the 147 maxims of stoicism, but more than that, just like a Greek philosophy. And it was, the very first one is know thyself. And the last one is upon reaching the end, be without sorrow. And that to me is the ultimate goal. So if there is some sorrow there, that is karma. And that is going, I need to have less attachment to this. And I need to let that thing be what it is and let it go and realize that I'm grateful for the opportunity that I have. I'm grateful that I got to know Joel. I'm grateful for the experience that I had. And man, the crater that his death leaves in my heart is simply evidence of how much I was capable of loving. That to me is a gift. So I don't think that I don't understand the criticism. I understand the response, but I don't understand the criticism because I feel like we gave so much player agency in that game. It just didn't look like most people going press X to skip or A to say this or B to say this. Branching dialogue is not agency necessarily. And I say that loving Baldur's Gate, by the way. Like, it's not about, that's a completely different kind of game. To be able to have a procedurally generated narrative that is based on player input is incredible. That's not the kind of game that we were making, though. We had a very specific story that we were trying to tell.
Gotcha. Well, the last question I have for you is maybe the
Yeah.
most important.
Okay.
Who do you think The Last of Us refers to and why?
The title, it's everyone. We are the last of us. It is these that remain after this event. It is the last of humanity. And it's funny that to me, not funny, that's the wrong word, but I do find it interesting that the way that nature works is that all of humanity goes through the sieve of this apocalypse, and the good and the bad get mixed down together, and that really gets very blurry because you can have Ellie and you can have David and you can have Tess and you can have Earl, or not Earl, sorry, Bill. You can have these opposite versions of each other that somehow made it through this thing together. And this event was the great leveler that ultimately the thing that allowed these people to survive is will and dumb luck. And that's why I love when Joel says it's called luck and it is going to run out, because that's the one thing that he has seen be the common denominator. People that fight, people that were smart, people that were equipped, people that had resources. Ultimately, it just comes down to luck. And that's why Joel's death had nothing to do with him getting his due. It had nothing to do with like karma or anything else. It had everything to do with the fact that's how this world works. Sometimes when you do the right thing, the wrong thing happens to you. And flipping it from the other perspective, someone got what they have always wanted. Someone got justice on their end. And that to me was the whole point of The Last of Us Part 2 is empathy and realizing that no matter what, I mean, I could go really hard and start talking about Naruto and the whole cycle of hatred speech that pain gives. But that is all that, if constantly you're seeking vengeance in the name of justice, all of that will do is breed more vengeance and more hatred. And that is the thing that we're trying to break out of. So I feel like we did our job and we did it very well with The Last of Us because we made people feel things and we made them realize that the futility of hatred and the futility of revenge. And ultimately, what it comes down to is the best thing you can do is forgive. And if you can forgive, that is winning. That is justice. That is the ultimate goal.
Oh, that's such a great answer. So, thank you so much for everything, all your help, and just all your valuable input.
My pleasure. We'll
All
catch up in a
right.
couple of weeks. All right, on.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lexi. Bye bye now.
Bye.